For those of you who were not with us last week, we were going through the life of Christ, and we were so abruptly halted and changed direction by God, and we started looking through this idea of why do you go to church? What is it that brings you to church service on Sunday morning? And we went through some various reasons of why people go to church, but we came to the conclusion that first and foremost, we are supposed to be here to worship God only. That's why we're here. Today, we are looking at the second reason of why do you go to church. And this week it was my final week of my class, an intro to the Pauline epistles, and I had to do a research paper, and I had to choose a pericope. I had to choose a certain passage out of the Bible of one of Paul's letters, and I had to do research on this particular passage, give it in context, pretty much give a sermon on it, and it's just written on paper instead of actually spoken. And as I started to dig into my passage, I chose 1 Timothy 3, which is the leadership passages in the first letter that Paul wrote to Timothy. And as Paul was writing this first letter, Timothy was located in the church in Ephesus. And we have the letter to the Ephesians here in the Bible as well. And the Ephesian church was a church that there were dire consequences headed their way, and Paul is warning them to repent. Otherwise, there are going to be some major consequences, some very dire consequences to your actions. And this Ephesian church was extremely divisive. They were very argumentative. They fought constantly, and they were just so dysfunctional that they weren't getting anything done. They weren't doing in God's bidding. It just wasn't happening. And Paul is telling Timothy that they need to prep for battle, that they need to be prepared because trouble's coming. They needed to restore themselves to the proper service that God had bestowed upon them in the beginning. My friends, the Ephesian church was in crisis mode, and they were in need of help. Does that sound familiar? The church here in Lima kind of has that same reputation of being dysfunctional. We fight a lot. In the past at least. Here recently we have gotten a whole lot better on that aspect. We don't fight and aren't as divisive as we used to be. But that's kind of the reputation we've gotten over the past few years as being this Ephesian church. Last week I suggested in the very tail end of my sermon that we need to get right before God, and I want to kind of explain a little bit more what I mean by get right before God. I believe, and it is just my perception of the situation, I wasn't here. I've only been here for about a year. So I could be wrong in my perception, but I've heard multiple sides of the argument. And my overall feeling is that we're not doing the basics of Christianity right. We have the basics of worship down. We mess up a little bit, but we're human. We're not going to have things perfect. But as I go on, we're going to figure out that the deeper into these basic Christianity things, it's not just a Lima church problem, it is an American church problem. It is an entire problem that runs rampant across our country because we battle certain things in our culture. First, I want to define what a disciple is. We're looking at active discipleship. Discipleship, disciples, all of that kind of idea. And a disciple is someone who follows Christ and strives to learn and embody his teaching. And I got that out of Webster's dictionary and a few Bible dictionaries, and I kind of combined this definition from a few different sources. Let me read it again. A disciple is someone who follows Christ and strives to learn and embody his teaching. Before I go too much further, I want to remind you of the basis of this particular sermon series. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not rely on your own understanding. Think about him in all your ways, and he will guide you on the right paths. Think about the Lord in all your ways. Trust in him in every aspect of your life. If you would, flip with me to Luke 14, verse 25. And I'm going to read up until the end of the chapter. Luke chapter 14, and I'm going to start in verse 25. Now great crowds were traveling with him. So he turned and said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, wanting to build a tower, doesn't first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, after he has laid the foundation and cannot finish it, all the onlookers will begin to make fun of him, saying, this man started to build and wasn't able to finish. Or what king going to war against another king will not first sit down and decide if he is able to, with 10,000, to oppose the one who comes against him with 20,000? If not, while the other is still far off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. In the same way, therefore, every one of you who does not say goodbye to all of his possessions cannot be my disciple. Now, salt is good, but if salt should lose its taste, how will it be made salty? It isn't fit for the soil or for the manure pile. They throw it out. Anyone who has ears should listen. Christ rounds this out by talking about salt. And if you remember about a month ago, we talked about this idea of salt being a preservation of let me strike that. We're going to reverse a little bit. Salt, in the eyes of Christians, we are a preservative of the culture. Christians are supposed to be the preservative of our culture. And also, what does salt do? Makes you thirsty, doesn't it? So, whenever you eat salt, you're immediately going to go grab a Mountain Dew, you're going to go grab a glass of tea or water or something because you're going to be like, salty, I need a drink. Salt creates a thirst for the word. And that's what the salt here is talking about. Now let's jump back to the beginning here. And we have three things. We're going to have three sets of three. That's just the way it turned out. I was flabbergasted myself, but all of us preachers like to work in even numbers, I suppose. I don't know what it is. But we're going to have three sets of three things. We're going to start off with Christ has these three requirements here in Luke 14 for being a disciple of his. First of all, he says, if you don't hate your parents, and if you don't hate your brothers and sisters, and if you don't even hate yourself, you can't be a disciple. That's kind of contradictory to what he teaches, isn't it? God, in his great commandments, he says that you're supposed to love God and love others. So what's this deal with hate? Are we really supposed to hate everybody? Oh, no. No. There's context there. You notice when he gave the great commandments, did you notice which one was first? It wasn't love others and then love God. It was love God and then love others. Our love for God is supposed to be so intense that the love we show our fellow brothers and sisters in Christ is supposed to look like hatred. That is how intense our love for God should be. And we're human. It's never going to be perfect. I've said that 1,000 times. But our love for God should be far, far above anything else in this world. Our love for we are supposed to love everybody else. That is our job as Christians. But our love for God is supposed to be so much further above that than anything else. Next, goes on. It's one verse. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. That's pretty straightforward. Let's look at the cross. What happened on the cross? He suffered, he was persecuted, he was beaten, tortured, maimed, disfigured. If you are not willing to put Christ first and take up your cross, which means you're going to be persecuted, you're going to suffer, you're going to, well, maybe not in American culture, you won't be tortured, but, physically, but maybe emotionally. You have to be willing to put Christ first and put yourself on the line for persecution and suffering, because it's not an if you get persecuted or suffer. It is a when. If you're following God long enough, it is going to happen. You are gonna find trouble, or trouble will find you, no matter how you look at it. The third step here, he goes through a couple of different stories about counting the cost of building a tower, or counting the cost of going to war. Simply put, he's talking about sacrifice. Have you counted the cost of what it is going to cost you in order to follow Jesus Christ? Have you counted the cost? Are you willing to give up everything you have for him? Are you willing to lay aside your wants, your desires, your perceived needs in order to follow him? My friends, there are things in my life that I have battled. One of those things is video games. It started innocently in 1985. I was 6 years old, and the Nintendo system had just come out. I had no idea what it was. Yeah, I know, guys, I'm old, aren't I? 86, original Nintendos. But that's what I started off on, the old 8-bit system. And it was a family tool. Actually, all four of us sat down and we played. But then the Super Nintendo came out, and you had to have that one, because, the old Nintendo systems, you had to blow in the end of the cartridge in order to get it in there, and then you had to jam it in and hit the thing and kick it a few times, throw it out the window, get it to work. But the Super Nintendo, you didn't have to do this. We wanted that Super Nintendo. It was better graphics. It was 16-bit. And then the Nintendo 64 came out. And then the PlayStation came out. And then the Xbox came out. And slowly but surely, the only things I ever did was play golf, go to work, and play my video games. That's all I ever did. That is all I ever did. I usually went out in the morning, played golf before work, went to work, came home, stayed up till 3 o'clock in the morning playing video games. This was before internet, so, I was out by myself. And in my mid-20s, I began to realize that it was an addiction. And I said the famous line of every addict on the face of the earth, I'm not addicted, I can put it down anytime I want. Wrong. Very, very wrong. I've had a heck of a time. There was about a 4-year period where there were no video games in my house because I didn't trust myself. No internet, no video game systems, nothing. We have a Wii now, and if we dig into it once a month, we're lucky, just because we're just too busy. What are you willing to lay aside for Jesus Christ? I wasn't willing to put Jesus ahead of my video games. They were too important. I wasn't willing to put Jesus Christ ahead of even my career in the restaurant industry. I worked 80 hours a week. And my family suffered for it. My faith suffered for it. What are you willing to give up and lay aside for Jesus Christ? This passage here, you're supposed to be willing to give up everything. You have to be willing to give up anything and everything. That means every acre of land you own. That means every house that you own, every car, every TV, everything. I've heard stories of people who live out of their cars. they want to be able to do more for God. I'm not suggesting we all go out and do that. But if God is laying something on your heart, let it go. Let it go. Video games was my demon, one of my demons. I had to struggle very hard to let that go. And it ain't easy. So let's look at, now hang on a second, I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to say one more thing. For a long time, I didn't want to be a minister. I did not want to be standing up behind that pulpit. If you follow God long enough, the things that he wants becomes your wants. I'm here now, aren't I? I'm up here standing at a pulpit, and I would not rather be anywhere else doing any other thing. Because God has gotten a hold of me long enough that the things that he wants become what I want. So when we lay our wants and desires down, eventually we conform to God's will anyway. You're going to want the things that he wants for you. And sometimes that's hard and sometimes that's easy. Now let's look at Christ and his disciples. There are three things here that talk about these three requirements in Luke 14. What did Jesus Christ's disciples do? What was the process that they underwent in order to follow Jesus? Well, first, they had to choose to follow him first. They had to make the conscious decision to say, you know what? I'm going to follow you. Second of all, they learned from him. They learned from Jesus once they started following in him. And then once they reached a certain point, they started teaching themselves. So it's a process. They were corrected. They were rebuked. They worshiped. They obeyed. They gave their own testimonies. They worked and practiced the disciplines, prayer, fasting, solitude, service. All of these things. It's a process that they went through. They had to follow. They had to learn. They had to teach. And all of these demonstrate their intense love for God above anything else, that they put Christ first, because some of these people, in order to follow him, dropped everything they were doing. They dropped career, family, children, everything, possessions, in order to follow him across the Israeli countryside. They dropped everything to be there, which speaks to, what are you willing to sacrifice for Jesus? What did they teach? Well, they equipped, they exhorted, and they encouraged. They equipped people. Have you ever heard the saying that God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called? When he called me when I was 12 years old to be a minister, I had no idea how to be a minister. Over the years, he equipped me with the proper knowledge in order to fulfill that. So when he calls you, if you don't know what to do, trust him. You're going to know what to do when the time is right. He will equip you. And you will be exhorted. You will be rebuked. You will be corrected. You will be taught how to do it right. And that is a process in learning to become a disciple of Jesus Christ. And encouragement. We have to encourage one another, not tear each other down, but build each other up. I want to go through a few passages that talk about this idea. And I've given them in the sermon notes for this morning. I don't have time to read all of these scriptures, but I just want to hit a few highlights. Galatians 6:2, carry one another's burdens. In this way you will fulfill the law of Christ, which the law of Christ is to love God and love others. So we're to carry one another's burdens. Verse 6, the one who is taught the message must share his goods with the teacher. We're to share with everybody. Whether you teach me or I teach you, we're supposed to share what we know with each other. For whatever a man sows, he will also reap. Verse 9, so we must not get tired of doing good, for we will reap at the proper time if we don't give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, we must work for the good of all, especially for those who belong to the household of faith. Encouragement. Okay? And we're going to flip to 1 Thessalonians next, and I'm going to read out of chapter 5, verse 11. Therefore encourage one another and build each other up as you are already doing. Verse 14, and we exhort you, brothers, warn those who are lazy, comfort the discouraged, help the weak, be patient with everyone. See to it that no one repays evil for evil to anyone, but always pursue what is good for one another. And how do we pursue what is good for one another? He gives 6 outlines here. Rejoice always. Pray constantly. Give thanks in everything, for that's God's will in Jesus Christ. Don't stifle the Spirit. That sounds familiar from last week, doesn't it? Don't stifle the Spirit when you feel it calling. Don't despise prophecies, but test all things. When I come up here in the pulpit, preach it against Scripture. Test it against Scripture. And then 6, stay away from every form of evil. 2 Timothy 4:1, I solemnly charge you to proclaim the message, to persist in whether convenient or not, rebuke, correct, encourage with great patience and teaching. Whether it's convenient to share our faith with Jesus Christ or not, we are called to share it. But encourage each other, Hebrews 3:13, but encourage one another while it is still called the day, so that none of you is hardened by sin's deception, for we have become companions of the Messiah if we hold firmly until the end the reality that we had at the start. As it is said today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. If you hear the Spirit's beckoning, don't stifle the Spirit. Don't harden your heart to the message that it brings. And then finally, Hebrews 10:23, let us hold on to the confession of hope without wavering. For he who promised is faithful, and let us be concerned about one another in order to promote love and good works, not staying away from our meetings as some habitually do, but encouraging each other all the more as you see the day drawing near. All of these passages, as you go through these this week and study the Scriptures and the context around these, I want you to see all of the following: learning, teaching, equipping, exhorting, encouraging within these passages. I was looking up some startling statistics for today's sermon, and I just want to throw these out. I got these off of a few different websites. I'm a statistics kind of guy. The population of the United States as of 2012 is 313,025,000. That's a lot of people. Okay? I wanted to know what percentage of Americans are Christians. 83% actually claim Christianity. That number is about 259 million. But the statistics get worse. 40% of Americans attend a weekly service. Only 40% attend a weekly service. That number is down to 125 million. And those who fulfill the discipleship requirements of putting faith first in their lives is only 9% of Americans. 25 million is all out of 313 million people. That is a startlingly horrible statistic. The United States of America is by far the most Christian country out there. And if only 9% are actually serious about their faith, then we've gone wrong somewhere. And I want to assert that where we have gone wrong is discipleship. We have failed to follow, learn, teach. We have failed to equip. We have failed to exhort. We have failed to encourage one another. I said last week that there's so many reasons why people go to church. When we come to church, we need to be focusing on Christ alone. We need to be focusing on the message that he brings. Part of the discipleship is being and giving yourselves opportunities to learn. And I'm going to pick on our Sunday school class. We've only got about a handful of people in our Sunday school class. That's one of those discipleship opportunities that we fail to meet. We just don't make the time. Whatever the case may be. I was guilty of that. Trust me, I was guilty of that. But we need to make use of every opportunity that we have to be able to learn and teach others. We have to be ready to be equipped, because next week we're going to talk about evangelism. The reason we don't evangelize is because we're not properly equipped. We'll go into that more next week. But there's one more thing that I want to talk about, and that's the church at Ephesus. Because in 1 Timothy, he says that Ephesus, there's going to be some dire consequences. You know what those dire consequences were? First of all, I got to tell you where the church in Ephesus is located. It is in the modern-day country of Turkey. If you know geography, you know that Turkey is a Muslim nation. Generations of people have been lost because they failed to heed the Word of God. And if we don't act in our country now, my friends, that is where we're going to head. It is not an if, it is a when. We have to get serious about our faith. We have to love God above everything else. We have to put Christ first, and we have got to be willing to sacrifice anything and everything for Him. This week, as I was going through preparing my sermon, on Friday morning, I get devotions every Friday morning. And this in particular one was from Greg Laurie, and his devotion is called Harvest. It's kind of evangelistic in nature for kind of new believers. But every once in a while, he throws something out there for those of us who are believers and are wanting to evangelize and equip others. And he gave this quote. So actually, he gave these were the first two lines of the devotion Friday morning. And it reads, "Just because you are a Christian doesn't necessarily mean you're a disciple. Every disciple is a believer, but not every believer is a disciple." Ooh, that hit. That hit right there. Not every believer is a disciple. Just because you go to church does not make you a disciple. Your actions make you a disciple. It is, last week the big idea was, if you're not willing to put the work behind your faith, then your faith is dead, based off of James 2:26. This week is the fact that just because you're a Christian, just because you go to church, doesn't necessarily mean you're a disciple of Jesus Christ. And when you walk through those doors this morning, I want you to evaluate your walk. I want you to evaluate everything in your walk, and let the parts challenge you that need to be challenged. Let the parts that encourage you be encouraging. And if you have any questions, my door is open 5 days a week. Come to me. Talk to me. Let's talk it out. Let's talk about your walk. Let's talk about your faith. Let's talk about all of the things that you're doing in your life. Find some ways to improve. Let me encourage you on what you're doing right, because not everything you're doing is wrong. You are doing some things right, and you are doing some things wrong. That's everybody. That's me. That's you. But we're all in this together. We are all here to come together, to build each other up, to exhort each other, to correct, encourage, and equip, so that we can share that gospel. This week, do some evaluation. Next week, we will round out this sermon series and we will move on. But I want you to evaluate your walk. Don't immediately start getting down on yourself, but let the Spirit guide your evaluation. If you need prayer this morning, come forward. If you want to give your life to Christ, now's the time. Let's start on that walk together. Let's take those first steps so that we can encourage each other and build each other up.